It's haunted. By a witch.
I've got a question for you. When the credits rolled on Hokum, did you really think this movie was about a witch? Or a haunted hotel? Or maybe a group of people losing their minds because of alcohol and hallucinogenic mushrooms? Because the more I think about this film, the more I feel like Hokum isn't really about any of those things. It's about people who can't escape their past. But before we get there, keep a few questions in the back of your mind. Why does the witch only appear to certain characters? Why does Fiona almost never see her? Why do Fiona's eyes remain open for so long, only to close near the end? Why does the film keep drawing attention to the chalk circle? Why does Jerry tell that strange story about goats and mushrooms?
They go looking for reflective surfaces.
And most importantly, why does the movie repeatedly bring our attention back to a small, seemingly insignificant saw? A tool that might actually tell us more about the film's true meaning than the witch herself. But before we get to the mystery of the saw, there are a few other pieces of the puzzle we need to put together first. The first question most people ask after watching Hokum is simple. Was the witch real? Because the film constantly plays games with us. One moment we're convinced she's real. The next moment, everything feels like a hallucination. Then the housekeeper mentions mushrooms being mixed into Baumann's whiskey, and suddenly everything is thrown into doubt again.
I snuck into your room and I put it in the flask.
But there's a problem with that explanation. If everything was a hallucination, how do we explain the fire? Why did Jerry see things too?
My wife's spirit visited me once on a trip.
Why did stories about the witch exist long before Baumann ever arrived at the hotel? That's why I don't think the film wants us to ask, was the witch real? I think the better question is, what form does the witch take for each person? Baumann is a writer, but something about him feels off from the very beginning. Almost every story he writes is bleak, dark, hopeless. Even Fiona criticizes him for it.
Why would you write this?
But maybe that's not just a creative choice. Maybe Baumann has been writing the same story his entire life. His own. The story of a little boy who accidentally killed his mother. A single moment that froze part of him in time. Sure, he grew older. He became a writer. But a piece of him never left that room. Never left that gun. Never left the moment everything fell apart. Here's something interesting. The people who see the witch most clearly aren't exactly innocent. Jerry killed his wife. Baumann carries the guilt of his mother's death. Both men have spent years dragging old wounds behind them. That's why I don't see the witch as a traditional supernatural monster. I see her as a manifestation of guilt, a wound that never healed. That's why everyone seems to encounter a different version of her. And that's probably why Fiona never experiences the same level of terror.
I know I'm gonna be okay.
She isn't carrying the same burden. She isn't haunted by the same darkness. Throughout the film, we're told the same thing.
If you ever find yourself being chased by a witch, draw a circle around you. Keep you safe.
Stay inside the circle. Don't cross the line. The circle will protect you. But protect you from what? The witch? Or something far more dangerous? Maybe the chalk circle isn't a supernatural barrier at all. Maybe it's a psychological one. A line between facing your pain and being consumed by it. A line Baumann lost years ago, which is why his past gradually swallowed every corner of his life. Now let's talk about Jerry's story, the one about goats eating mushrooms. At first it sounds ridiculous, almost like a throwaway joke. But the more I think about it, the more I feel like the entire movie is hidden inside that one conversation.
Goats like to graze on the mushrooms as well. And when they're coming up, they go looking for reflective surfaces. Staring into your own eyes on mushrooms deepens the trip.
And that's exactly what happens to Baumann. He doesn't come to the hotel to confront a witch. He comes there to confront himself, the truest version of himself. The frightened little boy buried beneath years of alcohol, anger, regret, and denial. The hotel becomes a mirror,
I was playing with my dad's gun and it went off.
and the witch might simply be what he sees reflected back. Now let's talk about Fiona, a character who may be far more important than she first appears. There's something unsettling about her eyes. For much of the film, they remain open, as if she's waiting, watching, as if something unfinished still hangs in the air. But then, as Baumann gets closer to the deepest truth of all, her eyes finally close. And that detail stuck with me, because maybe Fiona's role wasn't just to survive. Maybe she was there to guide him, to lead him toward a truth he had spent his entire life avoiding. And once that journey was complete, there was nothing left for her to watch. The saw, that tiny saw, the object most viewers probably forget by the time the movie ends. But the film doesn't forget it. It keeps bringing it back, almost like it's trying to tell us something. And this is where Hokum stops being a horror movie and becomes something else. Because the saw doesn't just cut ropes. It doesn't just save people. It's a symbol of severing something that has been attached to Baumann for decades. The chain he's been dragging ever since the day his mother died. That's why I don't think the true monster in Hokum is the witch, or the hotel, or the mushrooms. It's the past that refuses to let go. And maybe that's why the saw matters so much. Because in Hokum, survival isn't about killing the monster. It's about finally cutting yourself free from whatever has been haunting you all along. And maybe that's why the ending feels less like the death of a witch, and more like the forgiveness of a little boy. And why Hokum? And maybe it's finally time to talk about the title, because there's still one important question left unanswered. Why is the film called Hokum? At first, it just sounds like an unusual title for a horror movie. But the more I think about it, the more I believe the title itself might be the key to understanding the entire film. If you remember the beginning of the story, Albie approaches Baumann with genuine excitement. He wants to show his writing to a real author. He wants feedback. He wants to share the story of the witch and the strange legends surrounding the hotel. But how does Baumann respond?
Hokum?
He dismisses him almost immediately, a word that basically means nonsense, rubbish, superstition, a bunch of made-up stories that nobody should take seriously. In other words, Baumann looks at Albie and says, "It's all nonsense." But as the film moves toward its conclusion, a much more interesting question begins to emerge. What exactly was the nonsense? The witch? The legend? Or the stories Baumann had been telling himself for years? Because when you look closer, every major character in the film has their own version of Hokum. Their own lie, their own illusion, their own story designed to keep them from facing the truth. Baumann spent years running from the guilt surrounding his mother's death. Jerry spent years carrying the weight of killing his wife. And even Albie turns out to be more complicated than he first appears. Beneath the friendly smile, there's anger, resentment, a darkness of his own. And by the end of the film, he admits that he slipped mushrooms into Baumann's whiskey as revenge for the way he had been treated. And that's where the movie throws one final challenge at the audience. Maybe everything we saw was caused by the mushrooms. Maybe there never was a witch. Maybe the hotel wasn't haunted. Maybe the entire experience was a hallucination. But one question still remains. Even if the visions weren't real, was the truth Baumann discovered any less real? I don't think so, because the mushrooms may have opened the door. But what waited behind that door had been there for decades. The guilt, the regret, the self-hatred, the need for forgiveness. And that's why I think the title was quietly telling us the answer from the very beginning. Hokum, the nonsense Baumann laughed at, turned out to be the very truth he had spent his entire life trying to avoid.